So we will begin tonight's webinar with Dr. Erica Mayer. Dr. Mayer is an associate professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School and director of clinical research at the Dana-Farber and Women's Cancer Center at Faulkner Hospital. She's a medical oncologist focusing on new ways to treat breast cancer. Dr. Mayer graduated from Williams College with degrees in biology and history and Harvard Medical School before completing her residency training in internal medicine and fellowship training in medical oncology. She also completed a master's in public health in 2005. So, Dr. Mayer, welcome to tonight's panel, and thank you so much for coming to speak here. I would just like to take a moment to remind everyone about the Q&A feature that is available through the webinar. And as we get started, I would please encourage everybody to submit their questions. So, Dr. Mayer, our first question for tonight is just kind of a general, how did you become interested in medicine? And that can be from any standpoint or starting at any time in your career. Could you just share a little about your interests and kind of how you developed this career path?
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Julia, and thanks so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. This is a fantastic program, and I'm so excited to see so many people on the call. So let's see, I can tell you a little bit about myself and my pathway. Once upon a time, I was in your shoes. I was a Windsor student and came to Windsor with lots of different interests, but I'm gonna take these off because they have a lot of glare. What I really loved was I loved science and I loved history. Those were my favorite classes in high school. And so when I went on to college, I continued to explore my interest in those areas and majored in those fields. I was a double major, but I was also pre-med. And so I did lots of things like writing huge research papers, and I did a thesis in an immunology lab and just had a wonderful time doing those things. In the summers, I worked in the research lab in Boston. So I was beginning to get a lot more experience working in a lab, doing investigation, interacting with scientists, and all of it really confirmed my interest that I wanted to pursue a career in medicine. I should add that one of my parents, my father, it continues to be a doctor, and that was something that I grew up with. So just like you, I had a lot of medicine at home, and it was something that I was pretty familiar with and comfortable with. So I'd had experience seeing patients and seeing what doctors did. It is important as one considers this kind of career to really know, like, what is the job of a doctor. So I applied to medical school out of college. And back in those days, many people just like went to college and then they went to med school, and it was like seamless. I actually took a year off. I did a gap year at a time when like almost nobody did gap years, and went and lived in Tokyo for the year and did completely non-medical things, which was super fun and very important to really feel like I had some balance. And then when I was in medical school, it's kind of like being in a candy store where there's like all this stuff that looks really, really good, and you just don't know like which thing you want to pick because it's all really good. I loved surgery. I loved OBGYN. I loved pediatrics. I loved all the things I did. So I found it really hard to, at the end of medical school, where you have to decide what's the next step, what are you going to train in? I found it really hard to pick just one thing. But I ended up focusing on adult internal medicine because it felt very broad. There were lots of opportunities, and I really enjoyed my rotations. I should add that a theme that you'll hear from me, and I imagine you'll hear from my co-panelists as well, is it's really important to have great role models and mentors. And many of the people I met on my rotations when I was at the Harvard teaching hospitals were just these amazing mentors and amazing teachers. And I found it very inspiring, and it helped me kind of shape my career focus. And you know, I gradually gravitated towards medical oncology, which is an amazing and exciting field that ultimately really stitched together my interests in science and history, because it's an area where you can have deep relationships with patients. You can learn about incredibly exciting and cutting edge science, and you can work with amazing, inspiring colleagues. And so it's really been a wonderful place to be. I've been working at Dana-Farber now for 20 years, and literally no day is like the one before. Every single day is new and exciting. There's so many incredibly exciting things that go on in cancer treatment and cancer research. The field has changed dramatically just in the time that I've been doing this, and I get to take care of like amazing patients. So it's been a wonderful path for me. And as I mentioned, I continue to have amazing colleagues, amazing mentors, and role models, and hope to do so moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a great short history, I'd say. And so thank you for sharing that with us. So obviously, you're the director of clinical research, so you do a lot of clinical research as part of your job. So could you explain in your words or your own words what clinical research is and how is it different from other types of research?
That's a great question. And when we use the word research in science or medicine, it is an incredibly large umbrella term. There are so many ways to be a researcher. There's so many ways to ask questions scientifically about the world around us, about disease, about people. And generally, research falls into a few different categories. In my world, we generally think of three main categories of research. We have what we call wet lab research, which is when we think about people working in a research lab with a bench and they have pipettes and tubes and stuff. That's what we think of with wet lab research. And that's where we're asking some of the most fundamental questions about how biology works, how cells work, why do diseases happen, how can we try to treat diseases. And the things that we discover in that lab can translate or transition into people. And this is where clinical research happens, research involving typically human subjects. What I do is trying to take new drugs and new medicines and test them out in people to see how easy or hard are they to take? How well do they work? Are they effective at treating cancers? Do people do better? And then there's also another kind of research that we sometimes call dry lab research or outcomes research. And that's been an evolving field where we can ask questions looking at big populations and big groups of people and ask things like, well, if people do one thing, does another thing happen? Or if we want to study a group and say who's more likely to have this event happen or that event happen, what characteristics of those people might predict for that? And that involves a deep knowledge of statistics and data analysis. All that math that you're studying is used in these situations. But all of these types of research are very complementary and they stitch up really nicely together. So you can ask very similar questions in all three settings that are asked and perhaps answered in different ways, but they all interrelate. And for me, it all comes together in terms of how do we understand cancer, how do we treat cancer, both in an individual person and in large populations. What I do specifically is we write clinical trials. So we have new medicines. We want to see how well do they work. So we write a trial where we will design a way to offer new medicines to people in a very safe and controlled way. We'll have a very careful way of seeing how the medicine is working, how well are people doing, and then we analyze the results and present the results. The whole process can take a few years, so it's a pretty lengthy thing, but it's a really exciting way in particular for me to share research and discovery with my patients, because my patients are my partners in this process. When we are putting patients onto trials, we're asking them to hold our hand and jump in together and try to discover something new. And for many patients, it can be really exciting to be part of the process and to be a contributor to major advances in cancer care. So it's particularly rewarding, when we get to present new data and we think about all the individual people who contribute to it. It's really a wonderful thing.
Yes, thank you so much for that overview. And of course, especially with clinical research, that patient interaction and connection really is a core part of your daily routine. So on a slightly different note, you mentioned before that, each day's schedule can vary a lot, even day to day. So could you kind of give us a general overview of what your weekly schedule might look like in terms of maybe clinical trials, maybe you have appointments with patients. So just a general overview of your weekly schedule.
Yeah, so many doctors who are working in what we call academic medical centers, so centers that are focused around research and teaching, will be seeing patients or taking care of patients for part of their time, but then the other part of their time might be doing activities like research, teaching, administration, leadership. So for me, I think of myself as a 50-50 person. So about half my time is spent taking care of patients. Like today, for example, I spent the whole day in clinic seeing my breast cancer patients. And then tomorrow is one of my research days. My research, again, doesn't happen at a lab. It happens on my computer. So I'm basically in meetings all day, and I'm writing documents, and I'm talking to people and collaborating. My calls might be talking to people in Boston. I'm often talking to, one person's in Austria, one person's in Spain, one person's in Korea. We have really a global community of people who work on these projects together. So it's very fun to kind of bounce from call to call, and each one is really interesting, and we're doing something different. One thing I would mention is that our workday doesn't just like stop at 5 or 6 o'clock, but we just keep going. So as I'm sure you see with your parents, we work kind of at all hours sometimes, and that can be quite busy. But it's nice to be able to really get things accomplished, and there's definitely a lot of work to do.
Yes, for sure. So for the next question, what advice would you give to students interested in medicine about how to approach classes or other activities in college, or in general, how to determine if a career in medicine is what's right for them?
Well, as you can hear, I'm a big cheerleader for careers in medicine. So I definitely encourage anyone who's even a little bit interested to try to explore. I think something that's very important, as I alluded to before, is spending some time in a clinical setting and seeing what do doctors do, what do nurses do, what do nurse practitioners do, what do physician assistants do. There's so many different ways to be involved in medical care. So it's good to see what all these jobs are and see what might be of interest. It's a little hard to do that as a high school student. It's a little bit more for college students, but definitely something, if you ask around, if you ask your family doctor or a friend's parents or someone you meet on your college campus, these are, folks are really excited and enthusiastic to bring someone in for the day to see what's happening. So I think that's a wonderful way to just start getting a taste of it. In college, I think once upon a time, the thought was if you're pre-med, you have to be a science major, you have to, study biology or biochemistry or something like that. But nowadays it's changed. And really what you want to be doing is just following your passion. And if you really love, Spanish literature and art history, and you also like biology, you don't have to major in biology. You can major in, Spanish history or art history, but still do the prerequisites that you need. Being a doctor is very multidimensional, and of course, there's the science aspect, but there's a deep humanistic aspect. And if that's really what runs deep with you, it's absolutely worth exploring. One finds nowadays that many people who are ending up in medical school do not just go straight from college to medical school, but will do lots of different activities and get a lot of different experiences and exposures that really help you flesh out who you are as a person. And so, I think it's really following your passion and what you feel really interested in. That's, I think, a very nice way to find your path into a medical field.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, for this will probably be our last question, but what would you say throughout your entire career, so this can include all the way up to college and medical school, what would you say your greatest success and your greatest challenge has been? And how do you think that has made you view or has influenced your perspective on your career?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I think let's see. In terms of greatest success, I'm really, I would say right now, I'm very proud of the research program at Dana-Farber in breast cancer. We are the biggest breast cancer program in the country, possibly in the world, honestly. And we run a huge number of trials. And every time we have one of our big meetings, we have kind of big global meetings twice a year. I'm so excited to see the research work that our group has been working on so hard being presented up at the highest level and really changing practice. So I feel enormous excitement and pride in my colleagues for the work they do. And when I get to be that person doing the presentation and just feeling like you're part of the process moving the field forward. So I think that's really wonderful. I think in terms of challenges, you might hear this from other people, medicine's can be a really kind of busy place nowadays. There's just a lot that is asked of us on many levels of what we do. And, I kind of feel a little nostalgic for the time when it felt a little simpler and we didn't have so many kind of complicated computer programs and pieces of paperwork we had to fill out. And I would love to be able to focus on what's like really important in patient care and in clinical research and not have too much other kind of busyness around. But times change and we adapt and do our best. So I hope that's what you were getting at.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for all the insights you shared and for all your responses to the questions. I did see a few